Hello, everyone. My name's Matt Sullivan. I'm the data manager at Bonsucro. Welcome to today's webinar. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump straight in. Just want to do a quick housekeeping to start with. So this session will be recorded and the presentation will be shared. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. These questions will be addressed at the end. And we have a live Portuguese interpretation, which is available via the globe icon on your screen. Interest in this webinar has grown from a majority Portuguese speaking audience, but when we share the recording on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to have subtitles in any language of your choosing. So our agenda for today's webinar looks like this. We're going to have an introduction to the panel members and to our organizations. We're going to be looking at what the Union database is, looking at reporting on the UDB, as it's called, with a live demonstration. We're looking at next steps. And then, as I said, we've got the Q&A at the end there, where we'll try and address your questions. So with me today on the panel, we have many people we've been working with on this. So I have Anna, there you go, hello Anna, from the Roundtable on Responsible Soy, RTRS. And we have Michelle, a consultant on biofuels, working with RTRS. We have Patrick from Bioledger, who joins us on the panel as well. And in the audience, we have a number of people, most notably Max and George from the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, who have some really valuable experience on using the UDB, and they're there to take part if and when needed. So I'd like to go straight into an introduction of the panel members and our organizations. So some of you may not be aware of Bonsucro and RTRS. So just very quickly, we have a couple of slides. So Bonsucro is the leading global sustainability platform and for standards, platform and standard for sugarcane. And our purpose is to collectively accelerate the sustainable production and uses of sugarcane. A couple of numbers. So we have over 300 members worldwide, 153 certified mills against our production standard, and about 1.8 million hectares of certified land. So obviously a lot more to Bonsucro, but we're here to talk about the UDB. So I'd quickly hand over to Anna, who will introduce RTRS. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Matt. So to introduce you a bit what RTRS is the Roundtable on Responsible Soy. It was founded in 2006, and it's not only a global multi-stakeholder roundtable, but we also own a voluntary scheme for certified producers and for the chain of custody. So it has been approved by the European Commission for the biofuel market for a long time. And now I hand in to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Anna. My name is Patrick Lynch. I'm one of the founders of Bioledger. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Bioledger is an independent software company that was set up in 2019 to help support companies in the EU RED supply chain to improve the chain of custody through digital traceability solutions and compliance software. I worked in the biofuel industry for 15 years before I set up Bioledger at a company called Greenergy, and worked with many of the voluntary schemes from the beginning. In 2019, the biodiesel industry suffered a very significant fraud event, and I was one of the stakeholders that then worked with the regulators in Europe to try and understand why the chain of custody safeguards had failed, and to with support from the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, the Swiss government, and the iSteel Alliance, I set up Bioledger, and we received some grant funding to help demonstrate solutions for digital traceability. Those solutions then became, I suppose, a reference point to the European Commission design for the Union database. And you can go to the next slide, please, Matt. So Bioledger today provides mass balance software for companies in the RED II supply chains. We help companies integrate data that they have in their business operations and give them RED II compliance software. That mass balance software is the first and currently only service provider which has been integrated with the Union database. And by performing transactions in the Bioledger mass balance software, those are synchronized with the UDB. And in our role as service provider, we have worked with several of the voluntary schemes to test and help the European Commission redefine the operational logic of the UDB. And we now support and train companies in UDB reporting. Thank you.
Thank you,
Next slide,
Patrick.
thanks.
So straight into what is the Union database. So you will be bombarded if you are unsure or you don't know much about it with a lot of information, but what we're trying to do is simplify the understanding of it, introduce it to people who don't know about it, and make it easier for you to understand your role in that. That's the idea of this webinar. So in a nutshell, the Union database, or to give it its full name, the Union Database for Biofuels, is a platform developed and managed by the European Commission. It's based on the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, and that Article 28, Sections 2 and 4 of the Renewable Energy Directive. Many of you will know that as RED, RED 2 at the moment. And it's to improve the traceability of gaseous and liquid fuels in the transport sector, with the objective to avoid double counting and mitigating the risks of inconsistencies and fraud. Now, sorry for that sentence, but that is a definition from the EC, so it's important that we convey that definition to you guys. To reiterate that, it's required in RED 2, Article 28, and is mentioned in the implementing regulation 996 of the article. And the platform foresees the tracing of all transactions throughout the supply chain of biofuels, covering all liquid and gaseous transport fuels, excluding solid biomass fuels. So that's 4 bullet points summarizing 2 main bullet points. So as I said, we will be sharing this deck afterwards, so you'll be able to have the links that are underlined there to the directives and articles included, and all the other information as well. So what does it mean for the economic operators, which are well, I'll show you a picture of what the economic operator is, but in terms of the vernacular, the wording on this, the economic operators, and the voluntary schemes, or the VSs, as we've put in this presentation. So all voluntary schemes, EU certified system users, EOs, economic operators, will need to use the UDB to register their transactions of EU certified material. Now, we've put some dates in here, and the first 2, organizational setup and register certificates, will be done by your voluntary scheme. So in the case of Bonsucro, I am uploading all the economic operators that this applies to, registering certificates. This has to be done by the end of December. And from there, you will receive some login information. You'll be able to go in. When I say you, I'm talking about the economic operators. And then initial stock registration will be made from January the 3rd. And transactions registration, so the whole point of this, putting transactions in, there's no formal deadline. Now, for no formal deadline, we're working closely with the EC and working with them to understand their deadlines. There's a lot of things related to the database that have yet not been ironed out, which are not clear at the moment, but that will happen, and we'll be working with them and we'll be conveying that information. So as we learn things, we'll be conveying it to you, so no problem there. Just quickly, what I wanted to show is the UDB scope here. Now, it may look complicated at the beginning, but basically we're looking at a supply chain from the left, first gatherer, to the last interface on the right-hand side. The blue dotted line up to the top is the EC under the Director General of Energy, and they will operate and monitor the Union database. At the bottom, you see the voluntary schemes, who are register operators and certificate data, which is what I mentioned on the last slide. And then there is CB, which has the audit UDB transactions. Now, we will talk a little bit about CB's roles later, and we will also reach out directly to the CBs to work and talk our way through it with them in order to understand their role, which is slowly becoming clearer. So that's basically it in a nutshell. And as I said, we'll be sharing this and there'll be more information. Oh, sorry. So what data should be reported? Now, I do understand if you are completely new to the UDB, I'm running through this quickly, but as I said, this is just an introduction and we'll be in touch with people and we've got the Q&A at the end. So you may be feeling overwhelmed, but don't worry about it, no problem. So the information regarding raw materials from the first gathering point, sustainability details and greenhouse gas emissions savings. Now, that second bullet point may also look a little bit complicated and maybe overwhelming, but once you get onto when you get your account on the database and you'll see what that covers, it's not that complicated. It's a couple of fields and we'll explain that, or some of the more information will explain what that is. So where that information comes from will be quite clear. Material processing, conversion, and then we've got all transaction data regarding shipments, buying and selling of raw materials, intermediate products of fuels. Now, as I said, as we go through this, these will become clearer. We just wanted to put in there what it is. And then the last point we have on there is transactions must be registered within 72 hours of traded date shipment. It's important to bear that in mind. Once again, that will become clearer. So I'm going to hand over to Patrick now, who will talk about the database more from a digital point of view. Thank you, Patrick. I'm just going to stop my share.
Thank you, Matt. So as Matt explained, the intention of the UDB is to eventually replace the paper-based chain of custody documents that are transferred through the supply chain. Matt, could you share the slides still? I've got a couple of slides to talk to here.
So Patrick, it's there for you.
Thanks. So the objective of the UDB is to replace the paper-based chain of custody documents with digital consignments that are transferred from a supplier to a customer from the first certified entity in the supply chain until the point of consumption in the European RED2 markets. In order to make the Union database function within a commercial supply chain, the Commission passed the implementing regulation, which makes the UDB eventually mandatory for all companies in the RED2 supply chain. Within that regulation, the European Commission defines the data points that need to be transferred for each biofuel or feedstock consignment through the supply chain within the UDB. The voluntary schemes cooperated with the European Commission and many stakeholders in the supply chain over the previous 3 years. And through that stakeholder process, the voluntary schemes agreed a harmonized set of data that need to be transferred through the chain of custody. And those definitions and the format for the data points are explained in the European Commission wiki page for the Union database, and we can share a link to that after the call. I think it's in the last slide. Included in that harmonized list of data points are the harmonized list of raw materials and biofuels. Previously, the 15 different voluntary schemes have had potentially slightly different definitions of raw materials or slightly different definitions of certification scopes. And so the UDB for the first time harmonizes all of those data points so that everyone in the RED2 supply chain can pass the same type of data downstream. Next slide, please. In order to mimic the real-life operations throughout the full chain of custody, the European Union database is also designed to allow companies to perform their operational transactions within the Union database. And this slide looks rather complex, but that is because the biofuel supply chain includes lots of different operational transaction types, and those are reflected in the functionality of the Union database. They begin with, as Matt explained, the voluntary schemes register certified companies into the UDB, and then the beginning of the UDB transactions are that the first gathering points need to collect from points of origin. On the first day that the UDB goes live, companies will have the opportunity to register initial stock, and that allows you to bring in the full content mass balance into the Union database from day 0. From that point onward, you will be able to receive new stock from your suppliers, and those suppliers might be first gathering points or certified suppliers. And each one of those transaction types has a slightly different functionality in the UDB, which I will demonstrate very shortly. Included in those transactions are collection of raw material from points of origin and transformation of raw materials to biofuels, and then selling either raw materials or biofuels from suppliers to customers. I'll demonstrate those in a second. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the Commission have given companies in the supply chain 3 options to report their transactions into the Union database. The first one is an interface that is freely available to everyone in the supply chain. That will go live on the 3rd of January. The other 2 options are to send transactions into the UDB using a third-party service provider. Bioledger is one. There will be more in the future. Or if you have an ERP or IT system that manages mass balances, it can be connected to the UDB using an endpoint that's approved by one of the voluntary schemes. Thank you, Matt. Next slide. So today I will demonstrate the first option, which is the Union database interface, and that one goes live on the 3rd of January. So I will share my screen now, please. And hopefully you can all see the UDB acceptance environment. So the acceptance environment with this red banner is the testing environment for the Union database. On the 3rd of January, everyone in the supply chain will be invited to access the live environment. And the live environment will be a direct replica of this acceptance environment. The acceptance environment has been available for companies to test new features in the UDB. So when people gain access for the first time in the Union database, the first responsibility is for each company to check that their organization information has been registered accurately by their voluntary scheme. You also need to check that your certification information has been registered accurately, including the scope, the GHG values, and the address of each one of your mass balance sites that you intend to operate from. And then you can also register new administrative users. So if you want to invite your team to access your account in the Union database, you can add new users. Then if you are an administrator representing multiple different certified companies, you can select from between those companies here to access those different accounts. And the first transaction that you would perform in the Union database, which is a requirement for all companies, is to create an initial stock registration. And this is the onboarding your open mass balance on day 0 of the UDB so that you have some stock. And the process should be generally familiar to everyone. The data points that are required are the same data points that would normally be recorded on a chain of custody document that you sell to your customers. You need to record the mass balance site. You need to declare the mass balance starting date and operation duration of the mass balance. Then you can bring in different raw materials to populate your mass balance by adding a quantity and declaring the sustainability characteristics of the consignment that you want to bring in, and including the GHG values of that stock that you bring in as your initial stock. When you save that consignment, it will be available in your list of proofs of sustainability and sustainability data. And you will be able to see, this is a demonstration account belonging to Bioledger, so the data is not confidential. If you see some transactions, there are some partners that Bioledger is working with to test transactions in the Union database in the acceptance environment. So you'll be able to see your stock that you have in your account. And then after you've registered initial stock, the first point of new volume entering the Union database can only be performed by first gathering points. And if you're certified as a first gathering point, you will be able to add sourcing contacts. Sourcing contacts are either farmers or points of origin of waste and residues. If you were a used cooking oil collector, the sourcing contact would be a restaurant. And if you're a first gathering point for crops, then the sourcing contact will be a farmer or plantation. You need to record some mandatory data for each one of your sourcing contacts, including the National Trade Register ID number. Depending on the country that your sourcing contact is located in, the UDB will dictate the format of the Trade Register ID number, and you will have to enter the Trade Register ID number for each farmer or each restaurant that the first collector is from. Then once you've created a database of sourcing contacts, you can start to receive volumes from those sourcing contacts. If you have tens of thousands of sourcing contacts, there will be a feature where you can import in bulk a significant quantity of sourcing contacts through this bulk upload template. Then to then receive volume from each one of those sourcing contacts, you need to create a point of origin buyer trade, and that will be a declaration that that you're receiving volume from this sourcing contact on a specific day at a specific place and with a specific quantity, whatever it might be, including the sustainability information that you would normally record in your mass balance. That will then populate the stock that you have available in your account and all of these proofs of sustainability. For each of the proofs of sustainability, you can see the carbon and sustainability associated. And you will then be able to either you can sell that volume to a customer. So from this company, you can choose to sell it to a customer. And you can, this transaction then represents a sale from your account to your buyer's account. And you can specify an internal reference number. You need to define the dates of the transactions. and the sustainability data are defined by the stock that you have available in your mass balance and your UDB account. Sorry, I've been logged in for too long, so it's automatically logged me out. So you create a sale to your customer. If your customer sells to you, you can also receive transactions. So you will get a notification if your supplier has sold a consignment to you. You can then click on the notification here and accept or reject that consignment. And if you're a biofuel producer, you will be able to transform raw material into a biofuel by this adding a material processing transaction, in which case you declare the input material that you want to convert into the output material that you want to produce, and then the quantity, and you can apply a conversion factor. Sorry, I think that's probably as much as we have time for. This is really a first look at what you will have available after the 3rd of January when the union database goes live. So for now, I'll give it back to Matt and the rest of the panelists so that we can take some questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Before we do that, we're going to be looking at some next steps. So we'll go back onto the presentation. And Michelle will take us through the next steps. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Yes, next slide, please. Yeah, repeating a little bit what you, Matt, had already explained at the beginning for the voluntary schemes and the certification bodies. So currently, the voluntary schemes are in the process of finalizing what's called the economic operator onboarding and also loading certificate details into the UDB. So for certificate details, that includes the sites, the scope, the materials, and greenhouse gas type. For the moment, that's what's currently being collected and loaded onto it, either by manually or via a template, because there's quite a lot of sites. Some of the CBs have been assisting with the certificate work as well. And the future auditing role for the CBs still has to be defined. We are working with the Commission and in a collaborative way, like you can see from this webinar, with other schemes to together work on these issues. For example, the certification body auditing and other permissions, and there's a number of other issues that we need to understand better and hopefully define in a harmonized way. Certainly each scheme will have to write up procedures in their methods, which will define better these elements for the UDB. Another one would be certification updates. If they're updated every year, can this be delegated to certification bodies or not? There's some accreditation issue details that we're working on as well. So next slide, please. So the economic operators, again, has been said a little by Matt, to start with, your first steps now are to make sure you have access to the UDB. You get access by accepting the invitation that would have been triggered by the voluntary schemes. Once you're in, you can invite other users within your own organization. You should check your information that's there. You can change a few things. You can't change everything, but you can certainly update your organization's name, address. If you find certificate details that are incorrect, I don't believe you can audit that or edit that yourself. That would then be the voluntary scheme who could edit that on your behalf. So you need to align and inform the schemes about any errors that you might find. As Patrick has explained, in January, you can start to register your initial stock, which would be needed before you can actually register a trade. Luckily, for the moment, we don't have any visibility on what the final deadline is for transactions. So we have a little bit of time to get all this in place. Next slide, please. So we are working together, as I said, with the Commission, other stakeholders, various voluntary schemes together and the CBs and yourselves, obviously, to really clarify what needs to happen to make sure that the UDB will be a success and will work for everybody in a simple way as possible. So as you start looking into this yourselves, we would really like to receive your questions. And you can obviously ask them now, which you are. There's a few already in the Q&A. But if you have other questions later, please do approach the schemes or others, as I'll explain in a moment. And if we don't have the answers immediately, we will certainly ask them to the Commission and others and get you the answers. Next slide, please. So for Bonsucro, it will be Matt, and for RTRS, it's Anna. Both are on the call. For RSB, it's Max on the call. And there's also George at RSB who you can contact. Again, you'll have this slide, so you can contact them. You can have their emails later. In addition, you can go directly to the Commission. There is now a wiki, which has just been made public. There was a closed one. Now there's a public one. And in the wiki, there's a number of user guides, for example, about all the transaction details that you can find. And you can also contact the Commission directly. They have an email support. And of course, there are service providers such as Bioledger. As you can tell from Patrick's presentation, he's very deeply involved with the UDB and has a lot of knowledge, which could really be helpful to companies. So that's basically the summary of the support for the time being. And we would now like to have a look at the Q&A. Matt?
Thank you, Michelle. So we've got some good questions here, so appreciate people for putting those in. So how we'll do these is we'll go through them, and Natalia, my colleague from Bonsucro, will help with some of the Portuguese ones. I can see we've got a number of themes within these, so we'll go through them one by one, and hopefully, as I said, we can answer them. So, Natalia, could you see the first one from Giorgio?
Sim, lógico. O Giorgio, obrigada, Giorgio, por sua pergunta. Ele pergunta se o software da Bioledger usado para balanço de massa permite o controle de outras certificações além da Bonsucro. Se sim, possui as regras específicas destas outras certificações?
Thank you, Giorgio. Yes, the Bioledger software has been designed to demonstrate compliance with any of the EU RED II voluntary schemes, and we can give a presentation if you want to contact us after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Natalia, could you do the same great job on the second question, please?
Uma pergunta da Iraci. Iraci, obrigada pela sua pergunta. A Iraci quer saber se a usina é certificada, mas não vende etanol EURED. Ainda assim, precisa colocar as informações no banco de dados?
Thank you for that question. No, is a simple answer to that one. This is for, as we said at the beginning, it is for transactions into the EU under the directives related to the EU RED. So answer is no to that one. Thank you. Patrick, maybe you could answer the next one. And the question is, if we load cargo before the 31st of December, so basically if we load in this year, but deliver into the EU in January, so we're crossing over, does the cargo need to be in the UDB?
So the deadlines and the timelines that both Matt and Michelle explained are that the functionality of the UDB will be available to everyone from the 3rd of January, but there is no formal deadline for companies to register all of your transactions in the UDB. So, and if you do want to register your transactions, the first step is to register initial stock. when you register initial stock, it's a one-time operation. So from my advice would be for people to learn about how the UDB works and learn about those requirements. Speak to your end users, your customers, and ask them when they expect you to be able to supply volume through the UDB, because if you have the option to wait and register your initial stock later, I would advise that you wait. There is no legal requirement for you to register your stock in December or January quite yet. That's at the moment, that's your option. And the Commission, I think they know that the UDB is slightly imperfect. So when it goes live on the 3rd of January, they expect to get lots of feedback from all of the stakeholders. There are more than 10,000 companies that are expected to use the UDB. So they expect when it goes live, as much as possible before you exercise your one-time initial stock registration.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Next question comes from Pandit. And so they're asking if the ISCC auditor, well, ICC relates to the UDB. So my understanding of that question is, does this relate to other VSs or other voluntary schemes? So the ISCC is one of the VSs involved in this, as are Bioregional, RTRS and RSB, and a number of others as well. So it is the same UDB, yes. The next question, which has come up a lot from other people, is from Darlene, and it's related to NABICI. So if people are unfamiliar, just quickly, NABICI is a platform where people have to register transactions, particularly for the German market. And the answer there is yes, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending which way you look at it. If you already use NABICI, you will also have to use UDB. Now, in terms of how it works, it's similar in terms of how Bonsucro uses NABICI, is that we will register the economic operator and keep the certifications up to date in terms of dates. That is how we are working with NABICI. Other VSs may be different, so you'll have to work directly with your voluntary scheme to know how they're working on that. But in terms of Bonsucro, yes, you have to have NABICI as well, but we will be running it in a similar fashion. Thank you. The next question comes from Leorin, and it's asking if we trade all in non-EU countries, e.g. within Asia Pacific, or import from Asia to UK, do we need to import transactions into UDB? So please jump in, anyone else, but my answer to this one would be that this is related to EU Red. If you're registered EU Red and import into the EU, you would have to. I don't know where it is at the moment, but there was talk a few months ago about people having to register it even if they're not going into the EU, but I don't think that's going to happen. Patrick, would you be able to step in with an update on that? Sorry to put you on the spot, but my understanding is that at the moment it's only registering transactions into the EU that you use UDB. Is that still correct?
I'm not the authority on this, but my interpretation from the implementing regulation is that all transactions that are where the supplier issues an EU proof of sustainability under the certification scheme need to be registered in the UDB. So if you sell Bonsucro EU certified consignments from an Asian origin to a US origin, and you still issue the Bonsucro EU chain of custody document to the customer, then that should be in the EU Union database. I know it's counterintuitive and is considered outside of the jurisdiction of the EU, but the scheme itself is obligated into the union database, not necessarily the physical transaction, but through the scheme.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's my interpretation.
That question does come up a lot, and in our materials that we will publish online regarding this webinar, we will put that specific one in because I know it's a question that is asked a lot. So thank you for that one. While you're there, Patrick, maybe you could answer the next one, and it's from Marcel. What would be a specific definition of a transaction? Would it mean an invoice, for example?
This is a really good question, because the 72-hour requirement to register transactions is open to interpretation. And when lots of companies challenged it and said the 72 hours reporting requirement is impossible for physical transactions, the Commission replied to say a transaction can be a physical bill of lading on the loading date or on the discharge date, or when you issue an invoice. If it's when you issue an invoice, then it can be an aggregated group of 10 trucks over a 2-month period, and at the end, when the invoice date can then be interpreted as being the transaction date. So it's a good question, and it has to be discussed with your auditor, but I would use all of those different definitions to make this work for your business.
Thank you, Patrick. We're getting more and more questions. So the audience is getting warmed up. So thanks for these. These are excellent. And I say we're trying to answer them. And I will. So the next one from Anonymous, and it's a good question relating to somewhere else along the supply chain. So does the trader without storage, who can't register initial stock as not handling the physical product, need to be on the UDB? I'm looking at Patrick for that one.
I should turn my video off. The Commission has said that the UDB should only track the physical transaction. So a trader without storage, in theory, would not be included in the UDB. But if the normal EU red chain of custody document is given from physical seller, the intermediate trader without storage, and then the intermediate trader without storage issues a new chain of custody document, like a new POS to the customer, then it breaks the chain in the UDB. And so my impression would be that the trader without storage, who still doesn't take receipt of physical product, needs to receive a UDB POS from the seller and issue a new UDB POS to the buyer. But again, it's open for discussion. It needs to be clarified with the Commission and with the schemes.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm jumping around a bit on the next one, but it does relate to physical stock. So you can't run away by turning your camera off. So this question is, at the end of the mass balance period, they measure the physical stock. How do we reconcile the stock in the UDB to be equal to the physical stock at the end of the mass balance period?
Within the UDB, the Commission are developing a feature that allows you to reconcile physical stock by selling the excess UDB digital stock to what they call a surrender account. So that removes the excess digital stock from the UDB. They don't allow you to have an increase in a digital stock to reconcile with physical stock. So you can have a gain loss in the UDB, but you currently cannot have a stock gain. And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted to the Commission to allow economic operators to always reconcile the digital stock up or down to match the physical stock. So I will take note, and I'm going to included in our list of bugs and new feature requests.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. We'll go to Natalia now, please. Natalia, could you ask the question from Giorgio?
Obrigada, Matt. Just a second.
Thank you.
Obrigada, Matt. A pergunta do George, obrigada, é se o meu cliente deve estar cadastrado também no sistema UDB.
So just to clarify that, I think does downstream, it depends where that customer is, I guess, in the supply chain. So Patrick, for the registering of the customer, it depends what that customer is, I guess. If it
Yeah, if the customer has an EU certificate and they will receive the volume into their certified mass balance, then they need to be registered in the union database. If your customer is a consumer of the final product and they will not issue another EU certified sale into the market, then they do not need to be registered. You can still allocate that customer stock from your UDB stock without your customer being registered.
Thank you, Patrick. I do realize that the people who are asking these don't have a right to reply to our questions, but please get in contact. We have got a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get through all of them, but any of them that we don't, we will be able to answer. So no problem, keep them coming, and this will go into our question stock. The next question is related to, will the UDB replace the chain of custody? Simple answer at this stage, no. When I say this stage, that's not a leading answer. The answer is no. The UDB is that the concept of the UDB and how we manage it, and the flow that goes in and out of the UDB will reflect on any future changes to chain of custody, but that's taken into consideration. So to answer your question, no, it won't replace the chain of custody, but UDB will be taken into consideration when we're looking at chain of custody. The next one is, will there be any restrictions on selling products without a balance available? I think I've got an answer, but Patrick, maybe you could give an answer from knowledge rather than.
Yeah, you can only transfer a UDB quantity to your customer if you have that UDB quantity available in your UDB account, which means that you can sell on a commercial basis, you can sell to your customer, you can load physical to your customer. On a mass balance basis, within the 3 months outside of the UDB, you can still go short in your mass balance, but you can only issue the UDB proof of sustainability to your customer when you have that stock available in your own account to sell. So you cannot go short in the UDB.
Thank you. The majority of these are coming your way, Patrick. So we have one from Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. What level type of information is required to be submitted in the 72-hour deadline for a transaction? So I guess that question is more related to, does all the information have to be required or submitted? So
I can answer that one. So all of the data does not need to be recorded within 72 hours. You need to register the trade within 72 hours of the transaction date. And the mandatory points for registering a trade are the buyer and the quantity and the date. But you can save that as provisional and come back and edit the quantity later, and you can then also add all of the sustainability characteristics that you assign to your customer later, but it needs to be within the same mass balance period.
Thank you, Patrick. I've got a couple more before I go into a larger question. Do we need to register? Oh, thank you, Marcel, for the question. Do we need to register as transaction selling the blended products as well? And if yes, how?
I think it's the same question
So I think
that was asked previously. If the customer is certified and they may issue another RED 2 proof of sustainability after, then yes, you will need to register the bio component of the blended product. If your customer is an end user, then and they're not certified under RED 2, then they will not be registered. You'll still need to remove the volume that you assign to your customer from your own UDB account, but that will be sold to the surrender account. So if you sell to a fuel blender and they're not on the UDB, you will have to sell the same quantity to the surrender account so that you don't accumulate more stock than you have in the UDB.
excellent. Thank you. So I have a question from Lucina. The latest revision of my certificate is not updated in UDB. Who should update it? So this was something that we mentioned in the presentation, and in terms of putting it up there and keeping it up to date, that is very much up to the VS and the EO. So I don't want to speak on behalf of other VSs, but from Bonsucro's point of view, we will be revising certificates on the database. And that's how we do it in NIBC. So that's how we're going to be doing it on the UDB. Next question from Marcelo, and Patrick, this is quite a good one for you to expand, hopefully. So quite frank, what is the cost of the service that Bioledger will provide? Maybe you could expand a little bit on what that service is and answer as you feel fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. We can speak after the call, but generally speaking, Bioledger provides 3 services. One is the mass balance software that is synchronized with the UDB. And for that, we have a monthly subscription fee, which is dependent on throughput. We have 10 different categories of throughput. This call is very unique to me, actually, because for the last 3 years, we've sold our product to companies in the biodiesel and biodiesel feedstock supply chain. We haven't really offered or sold our mass balance software to companies in the ethanol supply chain or agricultural feedstock supply chain. So we need to evaluate our pricing really to reflect the value of the service to customers. So I'd like to talk basically offline, but the second service we offer is if you have your own IT system that you would like to connect to the union database, we can provide you with access to our API that allows you to connect your system to the UDB directly. And on that, it depends on how complex or prepared your IT system is and how much work needs to be done. The third is just a consulting service, and we can talk after the call if that's okay.
Thank you, Patrick. There was a second part to that question, and it was related to reported tons being deregistered in case some are used for other purposes or destinations. I like that question, Patrick. That does open up quite a few other questions, but yeah, I'd like to know that one as well, Patrick.
Well, again, it was directed at you, Matt, but I can give my interpretation.
Thank you.
If a company registers quantity on the UDB as your initial stock, and then later so that stock is sold to non-EU red markets, then you can sell that to the surrender account. So it's a non-European, non-UDB trade. You get rid of that stock by you don't reverse the initial stock. You sell it to this surrender account. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Another question for Darlene on initial stock. In case of being an economic operator in which the initial stock would change because of the production period. I'm not quite sure I understand that one because the production period would be set. Darlene, maybe you could contact us directly after this call and we can make sure that we can understand your question correctly to be able to give you a good answer. Okay.
Just on that, Matt, there are not many opportunities to correct mistakes in the UB. So I would exercise your right to not register initial stock early. So wait until you're confident about the rules of the UDB. Maybe wait until there's some demand from customers for UDB stock before you do the initial stock registration, because that's a one-time opportunity to populate your account. So if you can afford to wait, I would wait and get clarity on what your volumes are and which stock you would have. Then when you create some of the consignments, you can create the status as provisional. So you can enter some of the data that you're confident about and then update it again later. And the third final way to correct errors or rebalance your stock is to sell to that surrender account that the commission have, so that you can replace stock if you have made a mistake, and just do it in full transparency with the auditor and explain why you need to do it.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Patrick. We're down to the last couple of questions. We do have more, but as I said, we will answer directly if we can't answer them now. One of the last questions is, does chain of custody certified companies only chain of custody need to register into the UDB and register the transactions? Now, this is similar to a question we had a little bit earlier, and my understanding would be that if you're EU registered, you'd have to do it. Is that correct, Patrick?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. We're getting into some deep questions now, so let's end on a couple of deep ones just to test Patrick completely. Should self-declaration from points of origin, such as restaurants, be uploaded to the platform?
Yes. So in the demo, I showed the capability to add a sourcing contact. A sourcing contact equals a point of origin. And for each collected volume from the point of origin, it needs to be registered individually in the UDB. There is no ability to upload documents into the UDB. So you need to register the point of origin collection. That will, in theory, replace the self-declaration that you would normally have from a restaurant.
Excellent, thank you. And the last question I'd like to end on is, from when will it be mandatory? So we've got a couple of slides related to that. In terms of the economic operators being onboarded, that's by the end of this year. And as Patrick just mentioned, in terms of stock, best to wait until we know when it becomes mandatory in order for you to be able to know what information to put on it. So, sorry, not a great answer, but we don't know when it will be mandatory. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we're all in the best position to be able to be filling it in when it is mandatory. And by doing this webinar and answering your questions and engaging and collaborating, we'll be in a better position to be able to work it when it is mandatory. So on that upbeat note, thank you very much for all the people that joined. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the panelists. Thank you very much. And to you, the audience, there's some fantastic questions in there, and we'll make sure that we answer those, the ones that we haven't answered already. So if all the panelists could put their cameras on, thank you very much. And I will end the webinar now, and just a big thank you to everyone again. Thank you very much.